The war had ended only weeks ago, yet the scars of battle still lay heavy on the alien city. The human soldiers moved carefully through the broken streets, their boots crunching against shattered stone and glass. Banners of the enemy empire had been torn down, their symbols burned and destroyed, but fear still hung in the air like smoke. Commander Elias Stone stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd of aliens that had gathered in the square. The people of this world were thin, weak, and frightened, their scales pale from years of slavery. They whispered to each other, in hushed voices, watching the humans as if unsure whether they were saviors or conquerors. Elias knew that look well. He had seen it on other worlds too. When humans came, the enslaved often expected chains, not freedom. It was the legacy of the cruel empire they had just defeated. The aliens did not yet understand the difference between humanity and their old masters. The square grew silent as Elias approached the steps of the old governor's palace. His soldiers stood behind him, weapons lowered but ready. The air was heavy, and even the alien children clung tightly to their mothers, afraid to breathe. Then it happened. From the crowd, a young alien girl stepped forward. Her skin shimmered faintly blue under the fading light, and her large silver eyes were full of both fear and determination. Without a word, she dropped to her knees before Elias, bowing her head low to the ground. Gasps broke out among the people. Some looked shocked. Others seemed to understand her action, but Elias froze, his jaw tightening. He hated kneeling. It was too close to worship, too close to slavery, and he had not come here to be worshipped. "Stand up," Elias said firmly, his deep voice echoing. Across the square, the alien girl did not move. Her thin hands pressed against the ground. Her head still bowed. Her body trembled. But she did not rise. Elias stepped closer, his boots stopping just inches from her. "I said stand," he repeated, his tone sharper now. Still, she remained on the ground. Her silence was louder than any cry. The soldiers exchanged uneasy looks. One whispered, "Sir, maybe it's their custom." But Elias shook his head, his eyes fixed on the girl. Custom or not, he would not allow this. The crowd began to murmur, their voices rising in waves of fear and confusion. Elias raised his hand, silencing his troops and the aliens alike. He bent down slightly, his voice low but firm. "Why do you kneel?" He asked the girl, "Do you think I want this? Do you think humans came here to see you bow?" For a long moment, there was no answer. Only the sound of the wind moving through the broken buildings. Then, in a trembling voice, the girl whispered, "Kneeling is the only way to survive." Her words cut through him like a blade. He saw the terror in her silver eyes, the weight of her people's history pressing down on her small frame. She was not kneeling out of respect, but out of fear. It was all she had ever known. Elias's chest tightened. This was not victory. This was not freedom. It was the shadow of slavery still clinging to her soul. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not with us, not with humanity. You don't need to kneel to me." But the girl only pressed her forehead harder against the stone. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If I stand, they will take me again." The crowd stirred at her words, a ripple of sorrow spreading through them. They knew what she meant. The slavers who had ruled this world punished those who resisted. Standing tall had meant death. Kneeling had meant survival. Elias clenched his fists. This was more than a single girl's act. It was the broken spirit of a whole people. They had forgotten how to stand. He felt anger rising in him, but not at the girl. At the monsters who had done this to her. At the cruelty that forced a child to believe she must crawl to be safe. The commander's voice thundered across the square. "Look at me," he ordered. The girl lifted her head slightly, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "You are free now," Elias said, his tone steady and unyielding. "No one will take you, not while humans stand here." The girl blinked, her lips trembling. Her body wanted to believe, but her heart was trapped in old chains. For a moment, the whole square seemed to hold its breath. The human soldiers watched. The alien crowd leaned forward. Would she rise? Or would fear keep her down? Elias reached out his hand toward her, not as a master, but as a man offering trust. "Stand," he said, "one last time, softer now. Not because I command you, but because you are stronger than they ever let you." "Believe." The girl stared at his hand. The silence grew heavy again. Every eye was on her. Every soul waited for her choice, and in that moment, Elias realized her reason for kneeling was more than fear. It was a hidden story, one he had not yet heard. And that truth, when revealed, would leave him utterly stunned. ***, the young alien girl stayed on her knees. Her silver eyes filled with both fear and stubbornness. Her trembling voice echoed in the broken square. "Kneeling is the only way to survive." Those words weighed heavily on Commander Elias Stone's mind. They were not the words of a child seeking safety, but the cry of a people who had forgotten hope. Elias kept his hand stretched out, firm but patient. The girl stared at it as if it were a weapon, not an offer. The crowd behind her whispered. Among themselves, voices hushed and fearful. Some urged her silently to stay down. Others seemed desperate for her to rise. It was as if the fate of all of them hung on her single choice. "Tell me your name," Elias said softly. The girl lifted her head slowly, her long dark hair falling across her scaled cheeks. "My name is Liara," she whispered, her voice breaking. The commander repeated it. Liara, letting the name hang in the air like a promise. He crouched slightly, so his eyes met hers. "You don't need to kneel to humans, Liara," he said. "You think we came here to rule you, but we came here to fight for freedom." "Your freedom?" Liara shook her head quickly, her silver eyes shining with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I stand, I am saying I am not afraid. And if they return, Kai will be the first one they punish." The words struck Elias like a blow. Her people had been trained to kneel as a shield, to crawl so their masters spared their lives. It was not obedience out of loyalty, but obedience carved into their bones by centuries of pain. Oh, she was not showing respect to him. She was begging him, silently pleading for protection. Elias's jaw tightened. "You think kneeling keeps you safe, but it only keeps you chained," he said firmly, but Liara's voice trembled with desperation. "No. When I kneel, I am saying, protect me, don't leave me behind." The crowd gasped softly. Her words were not just her own, they were the hidden truth of an entire race. The act of kneeling was not worship. It was a secret plea, a code born out of suffering, passed from parent to child. It meant, "I will bow if it means you will keep me alive." Elias felt the weight of that revelation. His soldiers shifted uneasily, some understanding dawning on their faces. They had fought wars, but they had never seen a people so broken that begging became their only language. Liara clutched her hands tightly together, her head still bowed. "When you told me to stand," she said, her voice shaking, "I thought you wanted me to die." Her words made Elias's heart ache. How twisted. Had the galaxy become that freedom itself looked like death to her? He lowered his voice, speaking so only she could hear, though the silence of the square carried every word. "I don't want you to die, Liara," he said. "I want you to live, not as a slave, not as a kneeling shadow, but as someone who can walk with her head high, her lips parted, her breathing uneven." She looked at him as if he were speaking an impossible dream. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes, not doubt in him, but doubt in her chains. Elias could sense the moment, fragile and powerful. He pressed on, his voice steady. "You asked for protection by kneeling, but I swear to you, Humanity does not protect those who crawl. He leaned closer, his tone. Like iron, we protect those who stand. The words struck deep, not only in Liara's heart, but in the hearts of the crowd watching. A murmur spread through them, rising like a tide of forgotten hope. Some straightened their backs unconsciously. Others clutched their children as if seeing a future they had never dared imagine. Liara shook her head again, her fear still strong. If I stand and they see me, they will hurt everyone, she said, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face. You don't know what it's like to live under them. Elias's eyes darkened. I know enough, he replied. I know what it's like to fight monsters who believe they can own lives. And I know this: if you kneel forever, they've already won. Even if they're gone. The silence grew heavy once more. Lyra's hands trembled, her body torn between fear and a flicker of courage. Her silver eyes locked on his hand, still waiting for her. It was not the hand of a conqueror, but of someone asking her to trust him. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. If I rise, will you protect me? Elias did not hesitate. Yes, he said, his voice steady. As long as I breathe, you will not kneel again. The words carried across the square, reaching every ear. Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs into a swelling roar of voices. The people were no longer watching just a girl and a commander. They were watching the first spark of rebellion against their chains. Leora's body trembled, her legs weak from years of kneeling, but slowly, shakily. She began to lift her head. Her eyes, filled with tears, rose to meet Elias's. And though her body still shook with fear, her spirit took its first step toward. Standing, the crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. And Elias knew in his heart her silent plea was no longer just for protection. It was for freedom. Lyra's legs shook as she tried to rise, her body fighting against years of training that told her to stay low. Her silver eyes glistened with tears, but she forced herself to lift her head. The human commander's hand was still there, steady and waiting. Her fingers twitched, almost reaching for it, almost daring to believe, but then her strength failed. She collapsed back to her knees, gasping as though an invisible weight pressed her down. The crowd let out a sigh of sorrow, as if they had seen this before. Elias? Stone's jaw tightened, his hand falling slowly to his side. He did not look angry, but he looked as if he had just witnessed something far more painful than defeat. Liara bowed her head low, her voice breaking. You don't understand. We were not allowed to stand, not ever. Her trembling hands gripped the ground, clutching it like chains. If we stood, they whipped us until we bled. If we spoke without kneeling, they broke our bones. If we resisted, they made us watch as others suffered for our pride. The square fell silent. Every alien in the crowd lowered their eyes, their memories reflecting the same torment. Some wept quietly, some clenched their fists. Even the human soldiers hardened. War shifted uncomfortably as the truth of her words cut through them. Lyra's voice grew softer, but her pain carried clearly in the stillness. When I was a child, my father stood against them once. He wanted me to see what strength looked like. Her breath shuddered, tears slipping down her face. He stood tall, just for a moment. And they made him an example. Her silver eyes closed, as if she could still see it. They dragged him into the square. They forced all of us to kneel, and they killed him slowly, while making me watch. The crowd stirred, some choking back. Sobs, Lyra's thin shoulders shook violently. My mother held me down, forced my head to the ground, whispering, "Don't look, don't rise, don't ever stand." Elias felt a heavy weight press on his chest. The girl's fear was not weakness. Was the scar of a history written in blood? She had not chosen to kneel. Kneeling had been carved into her by terror. He clenched his fists. Anger boiling in his veins, not at her, but at the monsters who had done this to her people. Leora's words came out in broken pieces. Every child learns early, when the boots of the slavers walk past. You kneel before they even see you. If you don't, someone else suffers for you. Her voice cracked. We kneel not because we want to, but because we must. Because standing means someone we love will be hurt. Her eyes rose weakly to Elias, filled with shame. You told me not to kneel. But if I stop, if I forget, then I feel like I am betraying every one of them who died for trying to stand. The crowd murmured, their pain reflected in her words. It was not just her past, was theirs. Every one of them bound by invisible chains that lingered even after their masters had fallen. Elias took a slow breath, his voice calm but unyielding. Liara, what they did to you, to your father, to your people. It was meant to break you. It was meant to make you believe you are less than human, less than free. But I see you now. He stepped closer, his voice rising so all could hear. And I tell you this, they failed. The words carried through the square like thunder. The aliens flinched at first, then slowly lifted their eyes toward him. Liara stared at him in disbelief, her lips trembling. But we still kneel, she whispered, as though ashamed. Elias shook his head, his gaze firm. No, you kneel because they taught you to fear, not because you are weak. Fear is not who you are. Fear is what they gave you. His voice softened as he looked at her. Your father stood because he wanted you to see strength, not chains, and maybe you couldn't rise then. But you can rise now for him, for yourself. Leora's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as the commander's words wrapped around the memories of her past. For the first time, the image of her father standing tall did not come with only pain, but also with a spark of pride. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing something changing. Mothers held their children tighter. Young ones stared wide-eyed. And even the elders seemed to straighten slightly. It was as if Ilias's words had cracked the invisible chains binding all of them. Liara lifted her hands from the ground slowly, her palms open and shaking. She whispered, almost to herself, I don't want to kneel anymore. Her words struck the square like lightning. The crowd gasped, their eyes wide. Some of them looked terrified, others hopeful, and Elias, for the first time since he had stepped into this broken city, allowed himself a small, proud smile. He extended his hand again, not forcing, not demanding, but offering. Then don't, he said softly. Stand, Liara. Not for me, not for humans, but for you. The girl stared at his hand, tears streaming freely now. Her father's face flashed in her mind, the memory of him standing tall, his voice strong before the slavers broke him. She remembered his last words whispered to her as he fell. One day you will stand where I cannot. Her breath trembled, her heart racing slowly with the whole world watching. She placed her hand in Elias's, and though her body shook with fear, her spirit whispered a truth even stronger than fear. The chains of her past could not hold forever. Liara's hand trembled in Elias's grip, her fingers cold, fragile, yet holding on as if it was the only lifeline she had. The crowd stood silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the small figure and the towering human beside her. Every breath in the square seemed to pause, waiting, wondering, daring to believe. Her knees wavered as she tried to rise. Her body screamed to stay down, to bow, to obey the old command that had been carved into her bones. But Elias's hand was steady, unshaking, his voice calm as he whispered, You are not alone, Liara's. Legs trembled under her. She rose halfway before her strength failed, and she stumbled. Gasps filled the square, and some of the aliens reached out as if to catch her. But Elias held firm, refusing to let her fall. Don't be afraid of the ground, he said softly. Be afraid of never leaving it. The girl's breathing came fast, her silver eyes flicking across the crowd. She saw their faces, some full of fear, others full of desperate hope. Her chest tightened. If I stand, they'll all suffer. She whispered shakily, they'll see me rise, and they'll punish the others when they come back. Elias's expression hardened. His voice low but sharp. Who will punish them, Liara? The slavers are gone, their empire broken, their ships burned. His words echoed with force, but Liara only shook her head. They always return, always, she muttered. Her eyes haunted. You humans don't understand. They never stay. Gone. The commander clenched his jaw. Her fear was not illogical. It was survival. A survival learned through generations of pain. For her, the past was still alive, crawling at the edges of her mind like shadows refusing to fade. He released her hand slowly, not to abandon her, but to prove his next words true. Then you must choose, Liara, he said firmly. You can live forever on your knees, or you can stand and face the fear, not because it's easy, but because you are stronger than it. Her eyes widened at his words, her breath caught in her throat, strong. No one had ever told her that before. Her people had only been told to kneel, to obey, to submit, the idea that strength could be hers. It felt impossible, yet she wanted it with every beat of her heart. Liora's gaze swept over the alien crowd. She saw mothers clutching children who had never known a day without kneeling. She saw old men with bent backs, bowed not by age, but by a lifetime of submission. And she saw the flicker of something new in their eyes as they watched her. They were waiting, not for Elias, not for the humans, but for her. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. What if I fail? She whispered. What if I can't do it? Elias stepped closer, his voice steady. Then you try again and again, until standing becomes as natural as breathing. That is what it means to be free, Liara. It doesn't mean never falling. It means never staying down. The crowd stirred. At his words, whispers rippling through them like wind through dry grass. Some stood taller, as if testing the weight of the air without their chains. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only of fear they carried. A glimmer of something else, something brighter. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed her palms against the stone ground. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upward. Her legs shook violently. Her body screamed to drop again, but she forced herself higher, her breath ragged. Gasps erupted as she straightened. Her small frame rose in the center of the square, silver eyes glistening as she lifted her chin for the first time in her life. The air felt different, lighter, sharper. It was as if the entire city had stopped breathing, watching a single girl learn too. Stand Elias did not move, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried pride like fire. You see? He said quietly, you are stronger than your fear. Lyra's heart hammered in her chest, her knees shaking. For a brief second, she thought she might collapse again. But then she saw the faces in the crowd, as wide tears falling, hope flickering like stars in the dark. And she realized she was not standing only for herself, but for all of them. The moment was fragile, yet powerful. Some of the younger aliens, emboldened by her act, began to rise as well. First one, then two, then dozens. Old chains rattled in their minds, but they pushed against them, following her example. A murmur rose through the square, soft at first, then louder, a sound Elias had not expected. It was not fear, not submission, but the sound of people daring to believe. Liara looked at him, her voice still trembling. I am standing, she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it herself. Her legs shook, her body weak, but she remained upright. The crowd erupted, some crying, some shouting, some simply staring in disbelief. For the first time in generations, they had seen one of their own refuse to kneel. Elias let the moment linger before speaking, his voice cutting through the noise. "Remember this day," he said to all of them. "Remember the moment you saw one of your own stand again. 4. This is the beginning of freedom." The aliens trembled, many of them bowing their heads still out of habit, but something had changed. Something small yet unbreakable. They had seen a spark, and sparks could grow into fire. Liara stood tall, her chest rising and falling, her tears flowing freely for the first time in her life. She was not begging for survival. She was standing. For herself, for her people, but deep inside, a shadow of doubt still lingered because she knew the enemy would return, and when they did, standing would no longer be a choice. It would be a battle. The square still buzzed with whispers after Liara stood. The people could not believe what they had seen for so long. They had known only the ground beneath their knees, and now one of their own had broken the pattern. It was small, fragile, and uncertain, but it was enough to stir something that had been buried deep. Commander Elias Stone watched her carefully. Her thin frame shook, her breath ragged, but she did not fall in that moment. He knew she was braver than many seasoned soldiers he had fought beside. Bravery was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to rise despite it. "Good," Elias said softly, his voice carrying across the silent square. "You see now, Liara can stand. Even when every part of you tells you to kneel." Liara swallowed hard, her silver eyes still wide with disbelief. "I feel weak," she whispered. Her legs trembled so much it looked as if the wind might topple her. But Elias shook his head firmly. "No, this is strength, not weakness. Strength is not about muscles or weapons. It is about refusing to give up when fear crushes you." The crowd listened, their eyes darting between the human commander and the fragile girl who dared to remain standing. Some of them looked ashamed, others inspired, and some, for the first time, straightened their backs as if testing their own strength. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Liara could hear. "Though the crowd strained to catch every word, you said kneeling was a plea for protection. But no, these humans do not protect those who bow. We protect those who stand beside us." Liara's lips trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "Stand beside you." "Yes," Elias said, his eyes firm. "Beside us, as equals, as allies, not as slaves. Not as servants." He paused, his words heavy. "Humanity does not need worship, Liara. We need strength, yours and your people's." The girl's heart pounded in her chest. Strength. Her people had not spoken that word in generations. They had known survival, fear, and obedience, but not strength. And now this human was offering it to her, as if it was something she had carried all along without knowing it. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "My father stood once," she whispered, her voice breaking, "and he died. Is that strength too?" Elias looked at her carefully. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Strength is not measured only by living. It is measured by what you stand for. Your father showed you that even in death, standing was worth something. And now it is your turn to show them it can also bring life." The words pierced her heart. She could almost see her father's face, again not broken. Not dying, but standing proud in his final moments. For the first time, the memory did not feel like chains, but like a torch being passed to her. The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure if they should rise as she had. Some of them trembled, some lowered their eyes, but Elias raised his voice, speaking to all of them now. "You think strength belongs only to warriors, to soldiers with weapons, but it belongs to anyone who dares to stand. Your chains are broken, but your spirit will only be free when you decide it is." A murmur rose through the aliens. A mother slowly pulled her child to her feet, whispering gently. An old man straightened, though his back was bent with years of submission. The change was slow, fragile, but it spread like fire in dry grass. Liara felt the air shift. For the first time, her people were not looking only at humans for hope. They were looking at her. The weight of that realization pressed heavy on her chest. But it also filled her with a strange warmth she had never known. Pride. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. I don't want to kneel anymore. The crowd gasped, some crying, some covering their mouths. The words were simple. But they were dangerous. Once spoken, they could not be taken back. And yet, in those words, Liara felt stronger than she had ever felt. Elias's lips curved into the faintest smile. That is strength, he said, not the absence of fear. But the choice to face it, not the silence of obedience, but the courage to speak for the first time. Liara's trembling lessened, her feet steadied, her spine straightened. She still feared the shadows of her past, but now a fire had been lit inside her. And it burned against the chains that had bound her for so long. The people stirred restlessly, their fear battling with a new spark of courage. Some began to stand fully, some clutched their children, whispering that things could change. It was not yet a rebellion. Not yet freedom, but it was a beginning. Elias turned his gaze across the square. Your strength does not begin with weapons or war. It begins here, with this choice, kneel or stand, he said. And today, you have seen the proof that even the smallest among you can rise. The murmurs swelled into a low roar. The chains of generations did not fall in a day. But something had cracked. Something that could not be easily repaired by fear. Liara wiped her tears. Her silver eyes now bright with a mixture of fear and determination. She whispered, mostly to herself, if I can stand, then maybe all of us can. And for the first time, the idea did not sound impossible. It sounded like hope. But hope was fragile, and Liara knew the shadow of the enemy still lingered beyond the stars. If they returned, this fragile spark would be tested, and she feared that the true measure of her strength had yet to come. The city square had begun to change. Where once silence and fear had ruled, now whispers of hope spread like sparks. The people were still afraid. But some had begun to straighten their backs, to test the air of freedom. Liara stood among them. Trembling but proud, her silver eyes lifted instead of bowed for the first time. She felt like her father's voice was alive inside her. Not broken, but burning. Elias Stone watched carefully. He knew this moment was fragile. Hope was powerful. But hope without protection was dangerous and deep inside. He feared what Liara had already whispered, the enemy might return. His fears proved right, faster than anyone expected. On the horizon, the sky broke with a deep, rolling thunder that was not natural. The sound of engines, heavy and cruel, shook the ground beneath their feet. People froze, their half-risen bodies collapsing back toward the ground out of habit. Heads turned upward, and gasps spread through the crowd. Dark shapes appeared in the clouds, warships, bearing the hated symbols of the slavers, cutting across the sky like blades. The very sight of them sent terror rushing through the city. Parents clutched children, elders cried out, and many dropped back to their knees without thinking. Liara's heart stopped. Her breath came fast and shallow. She had known it. She had felt it. Hope was dangerous. The enemy had come back, just as they always did, beside her. Elias's face hardened. His soldiers moved quickly, forming lines, preparing their weapons. But the commander raised his hands sharply, holding them in check. The people were watching. And what happened now would decide whether freedom lived or died in their hearts. The first ship descended, its engines screaming. Dust and smoke filled the air as it landed at the edge of the square. The doors hissed open, and armored figures stepped out, their boots striking the ground with the sound. of authority. The slavers had returned, their cruel eyes scanning the crowd. Already searching for weakness, the people began to cry out. Some pressed their faces to the ground, begging. Others tried to hide their children, and many looked at Liara, the girl, who had dared to stand. Lyra's legs trembled, her hands shaking violently. The old instinct screamed at her to fall to her knees, to hide her face, to survive. Her father's voice clashed in her mind with her mother's desperate whispers. Don't rise, don't resist, don't die. Her body bent, almost giving in, but then she saw Elias, standing tall, unmoving. His soldiers behind him were ready, but he himself had not taken a single step back. He turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers. Don't kneel, he said firmly. His voice low but sharp. Not now, not ever again. Lyra's breath caught, her body shaking. The enemy marched closer, their weapons gleaming. The leader, a towering brute with dark armor, sneered at the crowd. So, he growled, you thought the humans could protect you? You thought we were gone. You thought freedom would last. The people shivered, many lowering their heads, but Elias stepped forward, his voice like iron. They will not kneel again, he declared. They are free now. The slaver laughed cruelly. Free, he spat. They are cattle, nothing more. Watch. He turned his weapon toward the crowd and barked, kneel, or I will show you what happens to the first who refuses. The square froze. The aliens looked at one another. Torn between fear and the fragile spark of courage they had only just begun to feel. One by one, some of them began to drop, their knees hitting the ground. The sound echoed like chains clattering. Liara's body shook violently, tears streaming down her face, her legs bent, her body ready to collapse. But she remembered Ilias's words. We protect those who stand. Her father's voice echoed too. One day, you will stand where I cannot. With every shred of strength she had, Liara forced her body upright again. Her voice cracked but carried across the square. No. The crowd gasped, heads snapping up to stare at her. The slaver leader's eyes narrowed. Liara's chest heaved, but her silver eyes blazed. We will not kneel. Not anymore, she cried. Her voice shaking but fierce. The slaver sneered, raising his weapon at her. Then you will be the first to die. Before he could fire, Elias moved. His weapon came up in a flash, his voice a roar. Then you will be the first to fall. The square erupted in chaos. The humans and slavers clashed, weapons flashing, cries filling the air. But through the storm, Lyra did not kneel. She stood in the center of her people, her body trembling but unbroken, and one by one, others rose too. First a mother clutching her child, then an old man with a broken back. Then dozens, then hundreds. The slavers had returned, but this time the people were not crawling. They were standing. The square erupted in fire and steel. Human rifles blazed as they clashed with the slavers, each shot echoing like thunder against the stone walls. Screams and cries filled the air, smoke rising in thick clouds. The people who had once lived only in silence now found themselves in the middle of a storm. Elias Stone led the charge, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold the line. Protect the civilians. His soldiers moved with precision, pushing the slavers back step by step. But the enemy was fierce, their weapons sharp, and their hearts filled with cruelty. Lyra stood frozen at first, her body trembling as the battle raged around her. Her old instincts screamed at her to drop, to bow, to hide. But then she remembered her father's last words. One day you will stand where I cannot. Her silver eyes burned with tears. But she stayed upright. Every blast of gunfire, every scream of the wounded threatened to shake her, but she refused to fall. And something strange began to happen. Others saw her, and they too refused to kneel. An old man, hunched and scarred, straightened his spine for the first time in years. A mother pulled her child to her feet, whispering through tears, "No more kneeling." Dozens rose, then hundreds, their fear still strong but their choice even stronger. The slaver commander roared in fury. "You dare to defy us! You dare to stand!" He raised his weapon and fired toward the crowd, but Elias moved like lightning, his own rifle snapping upward. The blast struck the slaver square in the chest, dropping him to the ground with a cry of rage. The crowd gasped, their eyes wide, for the first time. They saw a slaver fall not, a beaten victim, not a kneeling master, but a defeated enemy. The symbol of their terror had been broken. Lyra's voice rose above the chaos, shaking but strong. "They are not gods. They can bleed. They can fall." Her words carried across the square, echoing louder than any weapon. The people's fear cracked, and courage spilled through the fractures. The slavers fought harder. But their cruelty could not crush what had already begun. Every time one of the aliens faltered, Liara shouted, "Stand. Don't kneel, not anymore." Her silver eyes blazed with fire, and slowly her people began to believe. Elias fought at the front, his soldiers pressing the enemy back with every strike. But he knew this battle was not just about weapons, it was about spirit. If Lyra's people stood today, they would never kneel again. The enemy commander, wounded but furious, staggered back to his feet. His eyes locked on Liara, hate burning in his gaze. "You," he hissed, "you are the spark. I will put it out." He raised his blade and charged. Liara froze for a moment, her breath caught. The blade glinted in the smoke-filled air, but then she saw Elias still fighting to hold the line. She saw the eyes of her people, waiting, watching, and she knew this was her moment. Her voice rang out, "I am not afraid of you." She stepped forward, trembling but unyielding. The commander swung his blade downward, but before it could strike, Elias surged forward, his weapon clashing against the slaver's armor. With a roar, he drove the enemy back, his rifle striking with brutal force. The slaver stumbled, and Liara, her courage surging, snatched up a fallen staff from the ground. With every ounce of strength she had, she struck him across the head. The commander fell, crashing to the stone. Defeated, the square erupted in cheers, a sound that shook the air, not just from the humans, but from Liara's people. They shouted. They cried. They stood tall together, the last of the slavers, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled to their ships. The sky filled with the roar of engines as their warships pulled back. This time, they were not retreating to return, as masters they were fleeing. Beaten silence fell slowly as the smoke cleared. The people stood, not bowed, not crawling, but standing. Tears filled their eyes. But this time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of victory. Lyra's body shook with exhaustion, but she remained on her feet, her silver eyes turned to Elias. And for the first time, she smiled. "You told me humans protect those who stand." She whispered, "And you kept your word." Elias looked at her with quiet pride. "No, Liara, you kept my word. I only showed you the choice. You made it." She turned to her people, her voice breaking but strong. "We will never kneel again," she cried, and the crowd roared back as one, "Never again." The sound carried beyond the square, through the broken city, through the world that had lived in chains. It was the birth of something new. A people who had once known only fear now knew the strength of standing. Liara wiped her tears, her heart pounding. She was no longer just a frightened girl. She was a symbol. The proof that even the weakest could rise, and beside her stood humanity. Not as masters, but as allies. Elias raised his hand, his voice steady. "This is the beginning," he declared. "You stood today, and tomorrow you will rise higher. Until no slaver, no empire, no tyrant can ever force you down again. The crowd erupted, voices strong. The sound of freedom was not silence, it was the roar of people who had chosen to stand. And as Liara lifted her chin, the fear that had once ruled her heart faded into something stronger. Hope, courage, and strength for the first time in her life. She knew her father had been right. One day, she would stand where he could not stand. Today, she had.